Hi, I'd like to welcome Ellie Muir, who will be presenting today about some fine art. And she is degreed in psychology and Canadian history from the University of Toronto. Ellie has worked for Waddington's for the past decade, and she is currently with MaxSold as our new director of business development. Ellie comes to us as an appraiser of fine art, where she head up the department of appraisals and fine art for Waddington's for many years. And we are very excited to hear her presentation titled Treasures Uncovered, Making Auction History with a Fine Art Specialist. Please put any questions you have into the chat or into our Facebook Live thread, because we will answer those at the end. And welcome, everybody, and thank you, Ellie.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for taking time today to join us for another MaxSold webinar. Thanks, Heather, for the intro. I am here to talk to you today about just what it's like behind the scenes at an auction house as a fine art specialist. As Heather mentioned, most of my experience is with Canadian fine art, which is my favorite subject. And you'll see that a lot of what I cover is stories about artworks that are Canadian that I have helped with bringing to market and finding a new owner for. So we're going to talk about how fine art auction houses select what they will sell. MaxSold is a place that will take just about anything and does a great job with it. And a fine art auction house has to be a lot more careful about what they place in their auctions. So there are a lot of decisions that need to be made before accepting something for consignment. What makes something sell well or way above the estimate? So there are a few stories I can share where we can speak to that specifically. There's some kind of secret magic in the air on auction night that makes people raise their paddles and bid feverishly for things. And to some degree, a specialist can set that up for it to occur, hopefully a lot. And then I have some stories about connecting these items to eager collectors. So the first question, where do consignments come from when you're approaching a fine art auction house? We are always looking for consignments, and there are many places that we collect them from. Primarily, it will be estates. So, there's a big transfer of property, personal property, from one generation to the next. And I believe that probably half of every auction that I was involved in came from estates. And then, of course, there's downsizing. So there are people who are managing their lives and maybe moving from their 30-year home into the next phase in a smaller place, and they need to change the amount of stuff they have, whether it be art or decorative objects. So they'll approach an auction house about that. There are collectors. So these are people who just enjoy the process. I mean, they buy art because they love it. They collect certain subjects, certain artists, certain periods, and their taste may change over time. So when that comes up, then they'll approach an auction house and re-enter the secondary auction market with some of the items in their collection. I worked quite a lot with corporate collections. So corporations traditionally are quite large collectors of original works of art, whether it's paintings or sculpture. And I found that a lot of the corporate clients I worked with were switching out their approach to their fine art auction collection.
Ellie, really quick, could you move closer to the microphone? We have a few people requesting that either you speak up a little bit or move in a little. Sorry to interrupt.
I could try changing my microphone because I have this one. How about if I do this? Is this any better? Can everybody hear me okay? If that's any better? Testing? Or should I switch?
My mute was off, so that's better.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll try to keep speaking loudly for everyone. It's these little white microphones can be difficult. Anyway, where was I? Corporate collections. So a lot of them were changing their approach to their collections and switching out from expensive to ensure original artworks that were easily damaged and in high traffic areas to things that were more like branded images and that sort of thing. So we dealt with a lot of collections that were from corporations in that situation. Work from home also had a big impact on the footprint of a corporate office. And so also they downsized their collections, which ties back. And then hustle. So I included this because there are people in all of these situations I've listed above, but there's always somebody who has a certain artwork that perhaps I'd appraised in the past or that I'd spoken about in the past, but they weren't ready to sell it yet. But you keep that in the back of your mind, because when an opportunity arises where it could be a great time to include that painting in an auction, you can call back to them and say, listen, I don't think you're going to come across another opportunity like this. You really ought to consider placing this in an auction now if you're looking for a great return. And so that's where the hustle comes in, as well as just crisscrossing the country in planes and vans and meeting with lots of people in different cities, which I have done as well. So what does a specialist need to know? When you approach an auction house, there are a certain number of pieces of information we need to consider. So you do need to always send us images of the front and the back. That's very important in order for us to know exactly what we're dealing with, at least as far as we can tell by picture. We need close-ups of the signature. Is there any damage? Show us the labels on the back, and some good clear shots overall without, too much glare or anything in the way of the painting, so we can get a good look at it. If you know the name of the artist, do share it. Save us from doing our research, and we can get back to you with more accurate information if you know the artist. When it comes to Canadian art, I think a lot of the time I can identify who the artist would be before seeing the signature, which is a fun game, but it's nice to have confirmation. The medium, so that means what is it made with and what is it made on? So tell me, is it on canvas? Is it on board? Is it on paper? Is it paint? Is it pastel, charcoal, etc.? If you know that, please do share it. Is it a print? So, a serigraph, a lithograph, a silk screen. If you know any of those details, do share, and be sure to include the edition number. And the measurement excluding the frame. So that's really important. A lot of people will mistakenly give us the measurement with the frame included, which will then misrepresent the painting by quite a lot. I've had incidents where I've given an estimate based on what I've seen in an email, which is always subject to in-person inspection, of course, but then being a little bit disappointed when it comes in, realizing that they'd included the frame. So just the painting itself. And then where did you get it? So who owned it before you and before them, as far back as you can go? Did you get it from a gallery? Did you get it from an auction? Or is it a complete mystery? Whatever you can share. And then lastly, has it been exhibited? So has it been in a museum, an exhibition? Has it been published in a book? These things also can be important when we're considering an auction estimate. And then as much of these as you can include will get you a faster response from the specialist at the auction house. So the next question I'll ask is it what it purports to be? So that means, do I have a feeling about this? Does it give me a good feeling? Does it give me a funny feeling? Am I narrowing my eyes a little bit when I look at it? We need to be sure about the genuineness before we place something in an auction. So perhaps I won't give an opinion by email, and I'll ask you to bring it into the auction house so I can hold it in my hands, flip it over, make sure all of the different details line up and that it is what I think it is. And then if we still aren't sure, auction houses will have a large network of people that they can contact for a second opinion, whether it be family members of the artist themselves in some cases, especially in Canada, or there are foundations like the Dalis, the Picassos, the Alexander Calder Foundation. I mean, there are certain things that you just don't offer without consulting them first. And the picture I'm showing here is Kazimir Malevich, who is one of the most copied artists. And so I just thought it was a good representation of this problem. The last thing we consider as well is the research going to take much longer than the painting may end up being worth in the end, or is it a project that the owner should undertake themselves? All of these things are on the decision tree when we see an artwork. Another thing, so
hey, Ellie, really quick, the bar is covering the top of your slide. So if you're able to close that top menu bar, yes, perfect.
Is that better?
That is better. We see a menu bar at the top, but we can see your title for the slide now.
Okay, I don't think that menu bar is going to.
The zoom bar.
Yeah.
You might
Okay.
be able to move it somewhere if you click on it.
No,
Maybe.
I don't think that's going to make it better.
Oh, okay.
I don't think it'll obscure anything, so if it's okay, I'm just going to leave it.
Okay.
All right. So again, okay, so when you see a painting, you're going to consider at what point in the career of the artist was it created. Here we have a really interesting example, one of Canada's most famous artists, probably one of our best known artists internationally as well, Lauren Harris, who was an original member of the group of seven. So within his career, although arguably all of the paintings are beautiful in their own way, he went through many different styles. And there is a prime period, and there's then periods before and after that. So here's an example of one painting that is prime period and one that isn't. And I can show you here the prices realized are quite different. And you can see on the left is a painting by Harris of mountain forms, and it was sold for a record price. And on the right hand side is an abstract one that he painted later. And you can see that there is quite a difference between what is paid for these at auction. We can see here there's a poll coming up. So the poll question, Heather, would you like me to read this out?
Yes, because I'm not actually able to see it on the screen right now for some reason.
Okay. So I'll read it.
Definitely.
Okay. So the poll that's popped up here is, have you recently bought or sold valuable fine art? We're just curious about who the participants are today. So yes, I have recently bought, I have recently sold, I have both sold and bought, and finally neither, or I might have art to sell. If you guys can see that, go ahead and answer the poll. Okay. So here's another one. So you've got prime period, and then you also have is something typical for the artist or atypical, which also can matter. Sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's not, and I would say most of the time it isn't a good thing. But it all depends on the story that you can tell. So this slide sort of shows an example for the artist Laura Adeline Muntz Lyle, a Canadian artist, very well known for painting portraits of children, which you can see on the left-hand side. She was very accomplished with. We've got a really cute redheaded girl and then a brother and sister picking apples in an orchard, and they're just so cute. I mean, they're little round rosy cheeks. But then on the right hand side is a painting that was put through auction, and it's not a cute little portrait of a little kid. It's a woman in gardens, likely in France. Laura Muntz was an artist who was able to go to France to study. She attended the Académie Colarossi. She received excellent feedback for her work at the salons in Paris. And it was really something for a Canadian woman on her own in France at that time. It was the very late 1800s. I believe the painting on the right-hand side, the woman in the bonnet, is painted in 1897. This was painted at a time when Laura Muntz was, I believe, around the age of 30. She was unmarried, so at that time that's also quite unusual. But she had fallen in love for the first time. So this story relates quite well to the painting of the woman in the bonnet. She was exploring the Impressionist style, very much inspired by her life in Paris. And it turned out that the man that she was in love with was actually married and had been misleading her. So what ended up happening to Laura Muntz is she fled Paris. It was probably a very huge scandal and really upsetting for her back then, and set up a practice in Canada. She was a teacher for a period of time and then had a studio in Toronto where she started taking on commissions to paint these beautiful little portraits of children. During that time as well, her sister passed away, and Laura Muntz married her sister's widower, who had 11 children. And so that really did bring her into a whole new lifestyle. But it's interesting to see how the painting on the right was kind of the apex of her impressionist Parisian life just before she had to flee back to Canada, and she became a masterful painter of children. But in any case, that was the story I told when selling this painting, and I think it did quite well despite it being a really atypical subject. So you can see the prices realized are in a range. But I was happy with that result, as was the consigner and the buyer, which is always the best situation. So next, is there more to the story? So similar to the Muntz story, we have this one by Cornelius Krieghoff. It's called Moonlight. This is a painting that had been in a family for a very long time before it was consigned to auction. And we were able to research the provenance, so the ownership history, which ended up being really interesting. The first walls that it hung on were this residence in Ottawa. It wasn't Justin Trudeau's family at the time, but it was a industrialist and senator named William Cameron Edwards, who owned the house that now is the residence of the Prime Minister of Canada. And we had a estimate on it and a really good price realized. I think the story helped a lot. And there's a little more about the painting on the next slide in a video. And hopefully you guys all can hear this. I'm just going to press play.
This painting is gorgeous, but aside from that, it must be pointed out that the provenance is also really interesting. This was first in the collection of William Cameron Edwards, owner of a timber company and a Liberal member of Parliament and then a senator in the Green Chamber. He made his home in Ottawa at an address that is familiar to Canadians, 24 Sussex Drive, the current home of the Prime Minister of Canada. Speculatively painted around 1855, the same time that another iconic nocturne was painted, White Horse Inn by Moonlight, which is quite a famous painting in the collection of the National Gallery of Canada. Notice the tender detail. First, of course, the rising moon on the horizon. Then the eye notices the horse and sled returning for the night in those deep winter evenings when the dark comes so early. There is a little hole in the pond from which the residents of the warmly lit cabin can draw their water or perhaps catch some fish. Then, finally, we are left wondering about the interior of the cabin. What's for dinner? How was their day? Krieghoff's recording of the life of early Canadians is always a wonder to behold. This painting hasn't been available for purchase since it was offered at the sale of W.C. Edwards' estate in 1923, and we're so honored to be entrusted with it during this auction.
Okay, so a little video. That was me. In case you're not sick of my voice yet, I thought I'd also play a video of it. But I just thought it was nice to be able to tour around the painting too, and get a nice close-up look at the work of Cornelius Krieghoff, who is one of the most famous artists from Canada. He was very widely collected, especially appreciated by British expats who often bought his paintings and brought them back home, or it was nice to collect them as a new Canadian, as sort of a great way to illustrate our new and young country in a very traditional style. So he, to this day, remains quite popular for that reason. So another question we consider, is it fresh to market? So fresh to market, what does that mean? Just like the Krieghoff, which hadn't been offered in nearly 100 years, is it something that you don't see every 5 or 6 years at auctions? So somebody who watches auctions will notice every once in a while, hey, haven't I seen that painting before? And there are some that kind of keep coming up, and maybe, you know, it sells high, it sells low, or maybe it's diminishing returns. But it's important for collectors to see something that they haven't seen before. They haven't had the opportunity to own it, and they may not get the opportunity to own it again. So being fresh to market, that's what that means. This painting is by William Perehudoff. It came from a family estate collection, and it had been owned by the family since it was created in 1969. It was in beautiful condition, great bright colors, clean. and a really wonderful example of what Parahoudov was up to at that time. We put a quite modest conservative estimate on it of $12,000 to $16,000, and then waited for the live auction night to come up. This was a live auction, one of the last ones that I was involved in. When it came time for the bidding, we had a table of 12 or 16 people on the phones ready to take bids from people. And we ended up needing, I think, another 15 people on their cell phones scattered around the room, fielding calls from all over the world from people who wanted to purchase this painting. And that's always a really good sign at the beginning of an auction. And it did end up selling quite well. Not a record for the artist, but certainly the most interest I've seen in a painting in a long time. Another thing we consider is the condition. So you've disclosed that from the start. We get it in hand, we can confirm the condition. There are things that come in that might have a minor thing here and there, but not something that you need to worry about ahead of an auction. But then there are items that come in that really could benefit from a thorough cleaning, perhaps a patching. Maybe there's a hole in the painting. In this case, the painting was dirty. It was loose on the stretcher, so it wasn't hanging very nicely. It was wavy. The canvas wasn't taut, and there was a hole. You can see just in the upper left quadrant. We had it repaired. We knew that it was worthwhile. It was a beautiful painting by an artist who I think deserves to get really great results at auction for the quality of work that it was. And after we had it cleaned, this is what it looked like. It's a painting by Stanley Francis Turner. The given title is Heavy Snow, which I think was apt considering the bowed down branches full of that heavy snow. It was on canvas. We put an estimate of $3,000 to $5,000 on it, which actually was bordering on ambitious for the artist, but I could tell that it was something that our buyers would love. The quality of light and the quality of painting, freshly restored. You can't even tell that where the patch is from the front. It looked beautiful, and the price realized was $38,400. So the consigners were happy with the decision to pay up front for a bit of restoration in order to realize an excellent result, and we did set a new record for the artist that day. And then finally, is there a good spot for it in an upcoming auction? So you plan out your year 6 months, 12 months in advance. You keep your schedule in mind. Every auction house will have their major seasons. In Canada, we have a spring and a fall auction season where we produce the hard copy catalogs. You'll see the ads in the Globe and Mail. Everybody sort of convenes and goes through the previews and decides what they want to buy. That's where a lot of records are set. And then in between those two major auctions, there's plenty of online auctions. So, everything from the $100 to $5,000 range up to $100,000 will be offering things online in between with various themes. And one of the themes that was really important to me to spearhead was women in art. Women in art traditionally, just don't get as much attention. They don't realize the same results as men, even though they were there the whole time painting in excellent quality. You don't see them as much in textbooks. I mean, I think we could probably all name 10 times more male artists than women artists, at least in Canada. And that's something that I think should change because, they're just as good and they have their own way. So when this painting came across my screen, I knew that it was beautiful. It was something special. It wasn't an artist I was completely familiar with, but that happens a lot with women artists. So we looked into it. It's an artist named Erica Rutherford. Here's the title. And it was from a private collector who had several of Erica's paintings. In researching Erica further, she was quite a well-known figure in Eastern Canada, and she is a trans woman artist. So you can imagine how much of a pioneer she was in the 70s, and to have a self-portrait where she is, recording her new identity as a woman. There are just so many interesting aspects to the story that we were able to tell. And so we made this painting the avatar for the Women in Art auction this past March, which we had corresponding with International Women's Day. And it did very well. I believe there were some institutions even bidding on it. And I'm not sure if it ended up in a private or public collection in the end, but the result was quite good. And we were happy that we could start establishing some really nice secondary market auction records for Erica Rutherford. So that is the end of my specific questions that I asked myself. I think we had another poll. If you want to put it up, this would be a good spot for it. Okay. Canadian artist collection. So which Canadian artist would you like to add to your collection? This is actually the last question. Maybe we can reshare this later. Just gonna exit out. All right. So here we have a couple of images. So I'd like to talk a little bit about one of the most interesting paintings that I was ever given the opportunity to handle for auction. And you can see on the left is quite a famous image in Canada of a painting called The Fathers of Confederation. It was painted in 1884, maybe 1883, but it depicts a meeting that happened in 1864, which was a meeting of all of the different leaders of provinces and territories in Canada as they came together to form the new Dominion of Canada. Before that, we had just been a bunch of different colonies. So quite an important painting and a moment to record. The artist had to do it by picture. I mean, none of these people actually sat for him for the portrait. You can see here in the center is Canada's first Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald, and this is him later on the right. The artist did get to actually have him sit for a portrait. The artist is Robert Harris. And the Robert Harris was a very well-known portrait artist for the well-to-do in Canada. We were able to handle this portrait by Robert Harris a few years ago. It had been in a family for a long time, and they had always known it as a portrait of Chief Poundmaker, who was a very important figure in Canadian history and a member of the Cree Nation. He was known as a peaceful person, a leader in peace. And so during the Red River Rebellion, he urged a peaceful resolution over and over again, although he ended up being arrested for treason and unfairly locked away in prison, where he became quite ill. And then he did die when he was released from prison just a few months later. So he was only 44 years old at the time as well. So he was quite a famous figure. And I think at the time, Robert Harris was very moved by this story, and he decided he would paint a portrait of Chief Poundmaker. So you can see that he has depicted him as a very noble, calm, peace-seeking person. You can sort of see the chaos in the background and how he's holding his hands to himself and not engaging. So this was a really, really interesting story to tell. It also happened to be sold during the year that Justin Trudeau officially pardoned Chief Poundmaker for having been guilty of treason. He was not. And so it just all kind of lined up into a really interesting history study and person study and artist study all at one time. And it ended up being the painting by Robert Harris that sold for the most at auction. I believe it was a record. And this next is just one of the favorite things that I've ever sold or had helped to sell. When I worked with Bill Kime in the Decorative Arts Department at Waddington's, in the first few sales that I was there, this came in on consignment. It is a set of dinner plates from the Raphael service. It is from the Russian Imperial Porcelain Factory. They are exquisitely decorated and in a complete set within the fitted box that they were initially put in. So just so many things going for it. Great condition, except for maybe a few scratches on the plate from when perhaps someone had actually eaten dinner from these. But the first owner of these plates were Alexander III, the Tsar of Russia, and Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia. And so having this in the provenance was just so interesting. And it is in the research that they presented a new set of the dinner service, which ended up being a 50-place setting every year at Christmas. So you almost wonder, are those scratches from, the imperial family of Russia eating Christmas dinner? But the plate sold for quite a pretty penny. It was really, really, really fun to handle these, and they are just so beautiful. And here's just some pictures you can see on the left. That's Alexander III. This is Nicholas II. The plates resided in the Alexander Palace in Russia, and up top is just an image of the plates on display at auction during the preview. This was another item that I just will never forget. It was a beautiful big chunk of glass, French art glass, a vide poche, so something that you empty your pockets into as you come through the door, which is actually where the family had theirs when it was in their home before they consigned it to auction. Just a lovely deco 1920s piece of this bird. It was probably this big. Yes, I have a picture of it at the preview where you can see the quality, the way the light shines through it. Just an amazing thing, which I really loved having the opportunity to help with. And then we have this pink ground dessert service. So it's pat sur pat decoration. So all of that white is applied to the front in an amazing technique by the artist Desiree Leroy. And the color was so great, such a juicy, shiny pink. Then there were the Greek key borders. So those are actually pierced all around the edge in an amazing pattern. And if you look up close, you can see these vicious birds fighting over insects for dinner, which is what an unusual thing to put on a dessert service, but also just like, I'll never forget them. They were just so beautiful. And then the last story I have is about Walter Joseph Phillips. So one of the final consignments that I brought through the door at Waddington's was a pair of watercolors. They had been in a collection in Washington in the US for a very long time. They were in amazing condition, and they were from 1916. So a time when Walter Phillips, who was a British Canadian artist, he lived most of his life in Canada, was exploring sort of his cottage country. He was a instructor in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and his cottage country was in Kenora, Ontario, just across the border on Lake of the Woods. And it was a terrain that really inspired him. And I think his craft improved immensely because of that landscape. So this came in, and it turns out it was a really important watercolor because he used it as the basis for his woodcuts, which he's more well known for. Oh, it did well at auction as well. I think that's the second highest result ever for Walter Phillips. But he used it as the basis for his woodcuts, which he won awards for, and most people know him as a woodcut artist. So you can see the left side of the painting, he was inspired to make this one, Norman Bay, Lake of the Woods. And on the right-hand side, you can see Norman Bay #2. He made these both years later, but you can see sort of the crescent shape of Norman Bay there. So it's interesting to be able to tie it into his future work. And it was just the most magnificent watercolor. The other one was one of Winnipeg River, which he turned into an etching. And I think he also used it for inspiration for subsequent woodcuts. But I just was so happy to have handled these before I left, and had the opportunity to unframe them and see them in person. It's always such a treat to be up close to the work of your favorite artists in such a tactile way. So there is Walter Phillips. And then here's the poll question. Can we still put it up? So if you could add an artist after listening to my little talk to your collection. Oh, okay, we've already got it. Most people chose Lauren Harris. Okay, well, you hadn't heard me advocate for Phillips yet, but I don't blame you. I mean, really iconic Canadian artist. And all right, thanks for participating. I just put up some other options of the artists here. There we go. So top left, Walter Phillips, top right, Per Hudoff, bottom left, Cornelius Krieghoff, and bottom right, Lauren Harris. And that is the talk. So are there any questions?
Yes, we are going to have a few questions for you,
All right.
Ellie. All right.
Should I stop sharing my screen?
That's your choice. You can, or you can leave it.
I'll stop so I can see you asking me questions.
Okay. All right. So one question we have is, where and to whom can we submit paintings now?
Oh, well, Waddington's is still there. They're Canada's oldest auction house. They've got plenty of qualified staff to help you. I think they have an email account, info@waddingtons.ca. And Canada has 3 major auction houses, actually. So there's also a place called Heffel, Heffel, and there's Cowley Abbott, run by Rob Cowley and Lydia Abbott. So I think it's important for you to approach all of them and see what they have to say if you have something you'd like advice on.
Okay. And where would you recommend somebody take antique books if they're in Vancouver? It's kind of a specific question if you have any recommendations.
Well, antique books, they don't often make it into an auction. My experience at Waddington's is we sold some really fantastic first edition books, and maybe a few group lots of art books and that kind of thing. So if they're antique books, I would recommend that you locate a local antique bookseller and see if you can get some advice from them that way. Sometimes they come out, sometimes they don't. But that would be my advice. Start with somebody who specializes in books.
Okay. And another question about auctions. Would MaxSold consider doing an auction devoted to artwork at any point?
Absolutely. And we have before. Artworks do very well on MaxSold. As long as things are described properly, photographed properly. I mean, in this day and age, most people are buying a lot of things sight unseen on the internet, and an auction's a great way to do it. MaxSold has lots of examples online of just artwork in auction. I would recommend that we get fair market value for a lot of the things that I've seen specifically. So I would encourage it for sure. Yeah.
Okay. And can you speak to the recent popularity of Maud Lewis? Are her works still being found in garage sales, etc.?
Yeah. So Maud Lewis, definitely her popularity continues to grow. I think we are setting new records for her every year at auction. After the film Maudie was released, that really immortalized her to a larger audience, people were turned on to the extremely charming story of Maud Lewis. She's had a really great touring exhibition. I took it in at the McMichael Gallery when it was here. And if it's your thing, it's your thing, you know. It's really crudely done works. But finding them in garage sales, that would be a story if you approached me where I would go, oh yeah. And it would take some investigation for sure. So if you find something in a garage sale, the auction house is probably going to want to see lots of pictures or hold it in their hands to assess it in person before proceeding with an estimate.
Okay. And somebody's asking, what if they have fine art in the US or have a US artist? What would you recommend there?
Yeah, so for if you're in the States, it depends on the artist. I mean, you probably know the names of the artists that auction houses like Christie's and Sotheby's and Bonhams deal with. But there are lots of auction houses in the United States. So I would recommend going to one of your better known ones in the area with a long history of operation, somebody with good experience who can give you advice on it. You don't need to go with them when you bring something to an auction house. It's good to get as much information as you can and see how you feel about working with that person. It's all about trust as well. So if you feel you have a valuable work of American art, start by sending the images out to a few different places that you can get to physically, should they want you to bring it in.
Okay. And there's a question about copies. Are copies worth anything?
Well, they can be. I mean, they're not worth anything. So I'm assuming copy means somebody has taken a famous painting and done their own rendition of it. So something that we might catalog as after the artist. And there are lots of instances of this through history where you'll see, you know, everybody knows, what can we say, you know, Da Vinci's or Botticelli's or things like that, things that we can all call to mind without actually seeing them. They were copied even within the lifetime of the artist. And, you know, just after the lifetime of the artist, when an artist was well known, within or just after their lifetime, copies would begin. So you can have, you know, a wonderful 17th century copy, which might be worth more than the 20th century copy in those cases, if that makes sense. But it's something that you can always seek advice for as well. As long as something is cataloged honestly and in a straightforward manner, it can have value. It will never be as much as the original.
True. What about antique maps? Do you know anything about antique maps, buying and selling
Yeah.
recommendations?
So antique maps, I think, are having a moment right now in the secondary market. They're something that people like to collect. They always have. And it's just a matter of presenting it properly. So take it to someone who's knowledgeable. I have a antique map of the region surrounding Paris that's from, I think, 1600 something that I bought at Waddington's, which I love. It's fun to study it. But yeah, take it to somebody who knows about maps at Waddington's. That would be Sean Quinn. He's really helpful. And I think there is a good market for them, especially in good condition. The older, the better. The more detailed, the better. If we know exactly where it is. I mean, there's lots of factors. I couldn't list them all now, but definitely something that has value.
What is, there's a question here about commissions. What's a typical commission for an auction house to ask?
Sure. So the more something is going to sell for, in the opinion of the auction house, typically they will charge less commission. Every auction house basically charges about 20% buyer's premium, and they also charge a seller's commission. So for example, where I just came from, there's different brackets that you work within. So I believe it was $2,500 and less would be 20%. 2,500 to 7,500 was 15%. 7,500 and above was 10%. So it depends on what it ends up selling for. But if you've got something that a lot of people are interested in and they're competing over and you're getting nice 5-figure estimates, feel free to negotiate. Let them know. I mean, I might consider taking it here or there. I mean, what can you do for me? What are you comfortable offering for commission? Because it's never set in stone.
Okay. Well, there's a question here about MaxSold and whether MaxSold can provide, they say, an elevated service for selling, I guess, some comparable pieces, maybe to what you talked about. They said, can MaxSold provide this elevated service as well?
Well, MaxSold is also an auction service, but we are a slightly different animal. We do not set reserves, so that's one thing that you need to consider. While we definitely can achieve fair market value, we can't start the bidding at a certain spot. It's always going to start at $1. So the important thing is that it's described properly. It is what it purports to be. You know, it's photographed well. MaxSold can market things really well. But you know, if somebody's got something specific, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to talk to them about it with both of my hats on to recommend the right course of action.
Perfect. Somebody says they have an inlaid piece of art that was appraised years ago as priceless. How do they get an updated appraisal?
Right. Well, keep in mind an appraisal is a written document that you pay for from an appraiser who will do their research and take their time and come up with an educated answer and a single figure for you. An auction estimate is free. And it's also an opinion of what they think something could sell for within a range. So you decide what you'd like to do. Do you want to have it for your files? Are you holding on to it and you want someone to research it for you? They'll charge you a fee. If you want to take it to an auction house and just get an opinion, you can usually do that by email and they'll send you an updated idea of an estimate.
Okay. Are there any requirements from MaxSold to a seller when someone is selling paintings in terms of description?
It's important to be as accurate as you can without going overboard. So, you know, don't say more than you can absolutely confirm. We have people that vet catalogs and have a look at things. I'm on staff as well to help with that now. And yeah, I mean, it's only to your advantage to catalog something properly. So all of the things I listed at the beginning, the size, the condition, the images of all the different spots, front, back, signature. If you can get everything in line to have lots of confident bidders lined up, then all the better to you. And MaxSold is available to help you with that.
Okay. Is Giclée, I might be saying it wrong, is a Giclée of an artist's work, does that have value? And what would that value be like?
Decorative value, that's the term for a giclée. So
Giclée.
that's basically a fancy photocopy. It's like nice ink, nice paper. Sometimes it feels like canvas, but it's not the same as the painting. So a giclée is another way of saying it's like a numbered print, for example. Or so yeah, I would say decorative value, which usually is a fraction of the value of the original.
Okay. What is Ellie Mears' role within MaxSold? We talked about it in the beginning, but Ellie, you can introduce yourself again.
Yeah, so I'm the new Director of Business Development at MaxSold. I've been here since May, and I am charging forward with this exciting company, networking with lots of my colleagues in the auction industry. So I have been reaching out to a lot of them, a lot of the appraisers that I know, just to inform them of our service and to help them send referrals our way. I'm also involved in other larger projects. We're doing something recently called Charity Zero, where we are offering MaxSold's platform to people who volunteer for charities or work for a charity or a foundation who would like to hold an auction with our platform. There's another webinar about that next week.
I'm going to put that link in the chat at the end for everybody too, so they'll have it.
Great. I'm also, my team, Heather included, we're contacting, resellers. Business development is all about just getting the word out and networking and getting people familiar and confident in MaxSold's product. We've been around for 12 years and we're really good at it. So that's my job. I hope that answers your question. It's different every day, including this.
Okay, we have a question about an artist again here, Byron Birdsall. Can you talk about the saleability of original artwork by him?
I can't say that is something that conjures to mind a style of painting right away. So I would think it's not something that I typically include in my catalog auctions. So I would say if you want to know about that and the saleability in today's market, reach out with good images and ask someone at an auction house for an opinion.
Okay. And do you have a contact list where art can be submitted, or can this be compiled? Where do we find the direct go-to people to submit? Thank you. An anonymous question. Yeah.
The websites for if it's about Canadian art, the websites for the auction houses I listed, Waddington's, Heffel, and Cali Abbott, all are right there. I mean, you can chat with them. The email addresses are right on the homepage. It's really simple to get in touch. They're all knowledgeable, but if you need to get down to the specialist, it depends on what you have. So I can't really just list every specialist and their specialty right now, but they are available on all of the websites. If you want to email me what you're asking about specifically, I can give you some advice.
Ellie, do you want me to put your email in the chat maybe?
Sure. Yeah.
And then I can share it. So I'll do that. Let me see what other questions there are. If someone describes a painting as original on MaxSold, but is found to not be from a simple search, what should a potential bidder do?
Well, they can contact us about the lot in question. We have quality control people and staff that can be alerted. I mean, we have thousands of auctions going every month. So if you see something that somehow is in an auction and you don't think it's correct, let us know. We're completely open to hearing from you about it.
Okay, perfect. And okay, so when someone wants to list art on a MaxSold auction, how do we get your input, or whether to take the art out of the regular household MaxSold auction and move it into a MaxSold art auction? Okay, so this is a question about art auctions again, whether we do those, could we do those? I think.
So we don't do art auctions in terms of, several people submitting one painting at a time until we have an auction. It's always going to be a single owner situation. So if you have a collection of 30 things, we could have an auction for you. If you only have one thing, that's difficult for us to handle because we have to handle an entire collection from a single owner. But again, if you have something in mind, I'm not sure I'm giving what they're looking for here, so they can email me as well. I'll see if I can give them some specific advice.
Okay. How many items do you have to have in order to use MaxSold? Do you recommend selling art separately from other items in the home?
I definitely think you should never group art together. Maybe if you have a set of matching prints or something that, you know, are all framed the same and they ought to be in the same lot, that's great. But I recommend, yeah, like give each artwork its due, catalog it with the details that people will want to know so that they can bid on it with confidence. Keeping nicer artworks in an auction tends to buoy your wholesale. So if you're holding an auction with MaxSold and you have something that's worth, you know, a couple of $1,000s, something like that, it draws a lot of attention to your auction overall and raises the prices of everything. So there's a fine balance to consider here. Is it really something that deserves international exposure at a fine art auction house, or is it going to be something that tends to do just as well at MaxSold and also result in getting more bids for the rest of the items in your auction?
Okay, let's see what we have left. I think at this point they're just asking for your info. I think there are some people that probably want to follow up with you later, Ellie. So we'll get your contact info. Ellie.near at MaxSold.com.
Ellie.near at MaxSold.com. Yeah.
All right, perfect. And then please do tune in for our upcoming webinar on the charity initiative that we have going on. I am going to try and figure out how to post that in here because the chat.
Oh, there it is.
Thank you, Cesar. Put it awesome. All right, and I can then put Ellie's email for you guys. And so glad that everybody was able to come out today. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you, Ellie.
Well, it's fun. I love talking about art. I hope you can tell. I could have gone on and on, but you know, it's lunch hour.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that is a wrap. Thank you, guys.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.